couldn't just make it, even though it was called the Unknown War, or in the Soviet Union it was called the Great Patriotic War. You couldn't just deal with that subject when World War II was something that affected every human being on the face of the earth. Make no mistake, John Lord was the principal writer. The late John Lord, a wonderful man, great writer. No, I edited some scripts, and I worked on some and wrote, contributed material to them. But I would take nothing away from John, because the late John Lord was really the principal writer, and it's important that everyone know that. There would be about 16 or 17 of us in a room in Moscow, including a couple of interpreters. Most everyone spoke pretty good English. We would argue out situations. I mean, there'd be something that was historically incorrect, and John would bring that up, and the Soviet writer and director would say, no, this is the way it happened. And John would say, well, this may have been the way it happened in Russia, but this is not the way it happened on the world stage. And so we would go through all that. And I remember there was one thing, there were certain things we held as kind of aces in the hole. They would be things that didn't matter at all, but we felt we could, there was a lot of horse trading. We felt we could get away with by making them seem important to the Russians. There were lots of tensions in the film, but those tensions all came about when we were arguing over final scripts, over final cuts of film. We'd do a cut, and then it would be all torn apart, and then we'd manage to try to put it back together again. And sometimes we'd have to give in, sometimes they would, but I think it's a really honest film. I think it's a very, very good film. And I would stand up against any critic who finds major flaws in it. I don't think there are major flaws. There are some things left out that the Russians didn't want in that I would have preferred were in. There seemed to be party officials around. Most of them were fairly benign, unless we did something off the wall. I think that somewhere high up they were told not to interfere too much, but they certainly, for the record, wanted to be sure that the Soviet was portrayed in the best light possible. We felt the same way. I mean, this was their war. This was the unknown war. But we also didn't want to sacrifice the truth. When we first got there and began, we saw a lot of footage, and some of it we didn't like that much. We felt there wasn't really upfront footage. And Roman Carmen, who was a very famous director, alas, he died before the series was finished. He said, well, there's a lot of footage that we haven't seen, none of us have seen. It's in the Kremlin, and maybe you'd like to look at that footage. And I said, would we? And Fred and everybody was on that page. So we went to the vaults inside the Kremlin, and there are many levels of the Kremlin. It's very, very deep vaults. And there were stacks and stacks of nitrate film. I mean, this was the 70s, but even then, nitrate film is you have to really handle it with care. And we found footage. One of the things the Russians have always had is a sense of history. They want to portray their way, just as everybody wants their own history portrayed in the best possible light. But they used to send cameramen. The cameramen were the first people on the battlefield. There were probably more cameramen killed, I don't know, than first troops. But there was extraordinary footage. There was so much film, and we went through so much. I mean, it was just wonderful stuff. There were shots of the enemy from here to here. I mean, there were close-ups of faces of German soldiers. To my way of thinking, enough of that footage didn't end up in the film. More should have, and more would have. But Roman Carmen died. His death didn't receive too much publicity in the Soviet Union because he died on the same day that R.M. Khachaturian died.
Here at the Kremlin Wall in Moscow is the grave of the unknown soldier. Countless mothers and widows bring flowers here to pay tribute to their dead. Our story, a soldier of the unknown war.
The last episode of the series, which is called A Soldier of the Unknown War, was meant to be a feature-length motion picture. And that's the one where we were saving a lot of the stuff where civilians were killed. And that footage, without Roman's help, some of it just didn't arrive in the finished product. Now, when I saw some of the film, the first film coming out, before it had been put together, I saw some of the first film the Soviets already put together. I was very unhappy with some of the music. And my deal that I ended up negotiating, despite the fact that I'm ostensibly brought in as a script coordinator, I also wrote about 90% of the music because I could control it then. But we had great Soviet composers, so that when I wanted to have something that had a real Soviet folk flair to it or whatever, I would definitely go to them. But on the other hand, when I was writing music for things that took place in the Far East, I was familiar enough with Japanese music, and when I wrote about for the German army, I knew my German music. But I defer to the Russians on a lot of stuff, although the main Russian themes are all mine. But that's because I'm a musicologist. I mean, if you're a musician and you're a composer, you write music. It was a job. And it was a job I loved because, I mean, imagine being able to write that much music. Everybody thought it was such a hard job. It's a hard job when I think back about it. It was hell. I got no sleep, nothing, you know. But at the time, I remember when I was first asked to write, the first score I ever did was for John Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie. And I was asked to write the score. I said, oh, sure, I'll write scores. Of course, I'd never written an ounce of music for a film. You just go and you bone up on it. It's like if you're in a film, they ask you if you ride horseback, of course. But then you're out learning horseback riding. I mean, situation exists, and if you want to take it, if you think I was going to turn down films, documentaries on television or major films because I'd had no experience, nobody has any experience until they get it. And if you're invited to get experience on somebody else's time, terrific. The recording equipment was fabulous because I don't remember whether it was NBC or ABC that was going to be in charge of the upcoming Olympics, which were being held in Moscow. But whichever studio it was, they came over and equipped Soviet film with 8 and then pretty new 16-track equipment. So that when I recorded the Bolshoi Orchestra and the Soviet Army Chorus, I was able to take full advantage of multi-tracking, which was just great, and I never expected that. I worked with the Bolshoi Orchestra and the Soviet Army Chorus. They were great. They were terrific. God, they could sing. Oh. The basses, the baritones. I mean, I've never heard anyone sing that low. They were so musical. All the artists there are musical. Music is such a part of Russia's heritage, which is why I couldn't understand why in some of the early episodes there was really some kind of hackneyed stuff. And I knew that that was not what the composer meant. I had a feeling that there was a communist hand in there somewhere. I could have been wrong. All of my 20 hours didn't wind up in this show. I mean, I used some Russian stuff because it was right. The most important thing, as far as I was concerned, because in the end, whatever happened on the soundtrack fell to me. Now that was for editing the scripts and also the music, primarily the music and the sound effects. And I wanted it to be right. So if there was a piece of Russian music that was better than my music for a scene, I would certainly put the Russian music in. I also wanted a certain flavor that they gave it that I couldn't give it as hard as I tried. There were certain places where it just felt right to me to have, particularly in some battle scenes, it felt right for me to have the Russian music there. And I wanted it represented too, because the Russian musicians who became good friends of mine had really worked really hard on it, and that was important to me. The Soviets loved it, and we didn't show it to too many people, but I remember Burt telling me that he had in his contract that he got a copy of the stuff. So every time I'd get a copy, I had to have a copy because there was scoring I had to change and all kinds of films were constantly being changed, and I really had to be sure that everything was just spot on. So I'd always make a copy and send it to Burt. I don't know when his official copies arrived, but he showed it around and he said he got great feedback on it. I showed it to David Walper and he loved it, and David's a pretty harsh critic. The soul of the show had to be Russian, but it had to be as valid to Americans as it would be to the French or South America or wherever the film was going to play. I felt we were making a film, I considered it as one body of work. I felt we were making a film for the ages, which is why I was so disappointed when it was Deep Six, because of the Russians' invasion of Afghanistan before the film had its complete career. This series is important to every American and every Canadian. I would say everybody outside of the Soviet Union, because you've never seen battles like this. You have never seen one-to-one combat like this. You've never seen tank battles like this. The great tank battles between the Soviet Union and the Germans have the best tanks in the world, not America. America was very late to the tanks. When we got them good. But in the beginning, the German and Russian tank battle is incredible. The hand-to-hand fighting is unbelievable. I've never seen hand-to-hand combat the way it's presented in this film. That's why I was excited and decided to devote a year and a half out of my life. It was more than that, actually, but it was a year and a half of solid work to working on the film, because how often in your life would you get a chance to help history along, because that's what you were doing. As long as you went at it honestly and wanted to be sure as you possibly could that it was told even-handedly, chances like that come along seldom in a lifetime.